Hi, my name is Brad Cunningham. Today I'm going to show you how to build your first iOS app using Xamarin Studio and Xcode. So there's a couple things that are a little bit different from the previous videos that we've done in this series. In the latest video, we showed how to build a cross-platform application for Android using Xamarin Studio, and that was able to be done on Windows or Mac. In this video, we're going to show you how to build your first iOS application, and that does require an OS 10 environment of some sort. There are ways that you can develop on Windows and just compile to Mac, but for the purposes of this demo, I'm going to show you this entirely done on a Mac. So if you don't already have Xamarin Studio, you want to go ahead and download that first. So you can go to xamarin.com, and when you land on their homepage, you'll have a big picture here for Xamarin Studio, and it kind of explains what Xamarin is and what Xamarin Studio allows you to do. You'll want to go and download this product. The next piece that you'll need to install is called Xcode. Xcode is the development environment used for building native Mac applications. You can think of this, if you're a Microsoft developer, you can think of this kind of like Apple's version of Visual Studio. It's an integrated development environment that allows you to write Objective-C code and use the interface builder platform to develop your UI layer for iPhone or iPad or even native OS 10 applications. Xcode is a free product that is possibly installed already on your system, depending on how you configured your OS 10 install. If not, the easiest way to get Xcode is to just go into the Mac App Store. So from your dock, you just click on the App Store icon and you get the application store. And if you come up to the top right corner, you can just search for Xcode. And when you do that, the first one that comes back here is what you want. It's called Xcode. It's under the developer tools, and it's got this hammer and blueprint icon. And if you don't have it installed, you'll have a button here to install. In my case, I've already got this installed. So it's just telling me that this application is already installed for me. And as of this video, we're on Xcode version 5.1. So once you go ahead and download those tools, you want to download Xamarin Studio and download Xcode. Then you've got the two pieces you need to build your first application. The first thing I would recommend is that you open Xcode. You should be able to find it once it's installed. It'll either be on your dock or in your applications folder. You'll go ahead and launch Xcode. And what you get when you launch Xcode, let me just minimize this out of our way. You'll get this welcome window that says, do you want to start a new Xcode project or check out an existing project from source control? In our case, we're actually going to drive most of our project development from Xamarin Studio, so we don't care so much about creating a new project in Xcode, but what we do care about before we start with Xamarin is to make sure that the iOS development tools are installed into Xcode. This includes the iOS simulator, so that when you run your application, it's run inside a phone frame and it's emulating the iOS operating system. So to do that, just go up to your menu here for Xcode and go to Preferences. And when you go to Preferences, there'll be a bunch of tabs across the top here. You'll land on the General, and you want to go all the way over to the right and click on the Downloads tab here and see what components are available for download. Typically, you'll see a version of the iOS simulators are available. In my case, I've got iOS 7 simulator installed. I don't have iOS 6.1. Depending on which version of iOS you're targeting, you may want to make sure you have the correct simulator installed. There's also some documentation sets for iOS. I don't install these because it's easier to look that up on the web and it's more up to date. But you do want to make sure at least the iOS simulator is installed. And if you have any other dev components related to building iOS applications, you want to make sure those are installed too. Sometimes you'll see the developer command line tools will be listed here. And if those are not installed, you'll want to make sure you install those. So once you've installed those, you can go ahead and actually quit Xcode. That's all I needed to do in the first step, is to go and look to make sure that the simulators are installed. So I'm going to go ahead and quit Xcode, and I'm going to launch Xamarin Studio. And when you launch Xamarin Studio for the first time, you'll get this welcome to Xamarin here, and it'll say you're ready to start building apps for iOS, Android, and C#. And we can just go ahead and click this green button, say Start Building Apps. Then we're taken to this home screen. This will look somewhat familiar to Visual Studio developers. It's the same kind of idea with your recent projects and solutions on the left, some news down the middle, and then some pre-built applications that you can download from Xamarin to kind of learn your way through the Xamarin workflow. So what we want to do today is we want to create our first iOS application. So we're going to go over here to Solutions and just say New. And what comes up here is our new solution window. This is similar to Visual Studio. You'll see we have an option for Android, iOS, or even Mac, depending on the version of Xamarin Studio you have installed. You may have all three of these options. Mac would be for building a native application that would run on OS 10. That's the desktop version of the Apple OS. What we want to build is something that runs on the mobile version of the Apple OS, which is called iOS. And on iOS, we have a couple options here. When you expand this, you get to pick, do you want to build for the iPad, the iPhone, or do you want to build something universal that runs on all on all platforms, iPhone and iPad? Today, we're going to focus on building an iPhone application. So I'm going to expand the iOS node here. I'm going to pick on iPhone, and then we get to pick, what do we want to do here? Do we want to do an empty project, master detail, single view, something with tabs, utilities? For the first project, I recommend doing a single view application. The scaffolding that comes out of Xamarin just gives you some of the plumbing you need to be familiar with on how to get your main view set up and your main controller set up and to show that main view. So starting with a single view is really the easiest. We'll go ahead and give it a name. I'm going to call this Hello World, and we'll pick a location where we want it, and we'll just go ahead and say OK. And what's going to happen is that Xamarin is going to scaffold out a project for us. And once we've done that, then we have essentially a working iOS application. Very simple, but it is working. So let's take a look at the anatomy of this solution. On the left-hand side here, you see our Solution Explorer, again, similar to Visual Studio. And there's a couple of files that get spit out for us by Xamarin Studio. And the first one it drops us on is just the first file on the list here called app delegate. And there is some comments spit out here by Xamarin to try to explain to you what this app delegate class is. If you're a C# developer and you're familiar with the term delegate, this might confuse you a little bit. The use of the word delegate means something completely different in the Apple world, in the iOS language, than it does in C#. So don't get confused by that word delegate. What this means is actually the true English definition of the word delegate. This class is set up to act on behalf of your application. So it inherits from a class called UI Application Delegate, and its role is to simply provide to the operating system, in this case iOS, what the main window will be and what the main controller will be. So the iOS operating system is going to launch your application, and it's going to look for a delegate, some class that is responsible for setting up the high-level settings for your app. That would be what's your main window and what's your main view controller. So when we did a single page app or a single view app, Xamarin scaffolded this class for us. It created an app delegate, and it created a view controller for us and a UI window, and it glues them together here in the finished launching. Little note here, you have 17 seconds to return from this method. This is a comment that Xamarin puts in. So this is an iOS setting, an iOS application requirement that when someone goes to launch your application or return to your application, this finished launching method needs to return within 17 seconds to give your app a responsive feel. So you want to do very little work here. You want to do just the minimum. And the minimum would basically be creating the window. So you can see our window property here that's declared at a class level as a UI window. We create a new UI window and make it fill the whole screen, just the bounds of the main screen. And then we create a new Hello World view controller, which is another class we'll take a look at in a second here that Xamarin scaffolded for us. And then we just wire up the Windows root view controller to be the instance of the view controller we just created. We call make the key invisible and then return true. So we're just wiring up the window, telling it to become visible and show it on screen. And you may notice the word controller here and view, and this pattern may seem familiar. In iOS, the patterns that they drive you towards is an MVC pattern, so a model view controller type pattern, where Hello World view controller is a class that Xamarin created for us, and the view in this pattern would be our window, our UI window. So we're taking the view and setting its controller equal to the view controller that we created. So that's the first class. This is our main entry point into our application. This is what wires up the top level window and its view controller. So let's take a look at this Hello World view controller. Just go over to the left on my solution and double click on it. And you can see that it's a partial class and it inherits from UI view controller. And there's a couple of scaffolded methods in here for us. Did you receive a memory warning? And view did load. View did load is basically the onload method. So once your view is wired up via the app delegate and it says this is the view controller and the view itself is loaded, then you can perform any additional steps that you want to do. So this plugs together the controller piece and the view piece. And you'll notice that this says it's a partial class and there's a hello world view controller.designer.cs. And that might be familiar to anybody who's a Windows Forms developer. This would be a generated file, and this is where in Windows Forms you would see things like the definitions of your buttons and your click handlers on your buttons. They would all get stuck into this designer.cs file. And same kind of warning at the top like you'd see in Visual Studio, that this is a generated file and that you shouldn't edit it because it will be overwritten by the generator. In this case, it says this is automatically generated by MonoDevelop, which was the previous term for Xamarin Studio, and it's to store outlets and actions made in the Xcode designer. So it's telling us that the code that ends up in this file is actually going to be generated by the Xcode product that we showed earlier. So it's kind of a key distinction here in Xamarin Studio. They decided that the UI layer for these cross-platform mobile apps should be built in the native UI language of the given platform. So we looked at this previously. If you watch the previous videos on Android, we wrote that UI in AXML, which is the native Android UI markup language. And as we move over to iOS now, again, Xamarin is pushing us towards the model where we develop the UI natively using the normal Mac controls. So we would do that actually through the Xcode product. It's a whole separate application, and that's where the UI designer for iOS lives, and that's where that code will be generated. Now Xamarin will hook into Xcode and will update this file for us based on the changes we make in Xcode. So we'll go ahead and close this for now. We'll come back and look at that in a minute. There's a hello world view controller.xib or zib. We'll talk about that in just a second. And let's come down here to main.cs. Main.cs is literally the main method with the arguments passed in, static void main args, just like you'd see in any C# project. We don't really ever have to care about this other than it says UI application.main and here's the app delegate. So this is a step above app delegate. This is when the application itself is launched, we wire up to tell it which class should be the delegate. We say it should be app delegate. App delegate comes in and says the window should be this new window I just created, and the view controller should be this controller instance here. And those plug all the pieces together, and your application can start. So before we jump into designing the UI, the first thing I want to do is just run what Xamarin Studio has created for us and see how that goes. So up here, we've got a play button to run the application and debug, and you'll notice this drop down. We can pick an iOS device, a physical device plugged in, or one of the simulators. So we can do iPhone retinas at various sizes and iPads. So I picked this to be an iPhone application, and let's see, I've got an iPhone 3.5, 4-inch, 64-bit 4-inch. So let's just go with a 4-inch iOS 7.1. So that's the latest iPhone 7.1, and I'm going to go ahead and press play. This is going to build. Again, from the previous videos, you know that the status windows in Xamarin happen up at the top panel here. And my simulator showed up off screen here. Let's see if I can shrink this down just a little bit. I'll bring it on screen so you can see part of it. And I'm going to see if I can shrink this down just a little bit. Okay, so we're not going to get it shrunk down enough to fit on screen, unfortunately, but I'll just explain what I'm doing off screen here, and you'll be able to see parts of it. So Here we've landed on a gray screen, and it's got a little battery indicator and carrier indicator and clock. Off screen here is the rest of the frame for the emulator, and I'm just clicking the home button. So when I click the home button, I'm back to a home screen, and this looks just like your iPhone. Again, just like the Windows Phone emulator in this regard, and somewhat like the Android emulator. I would say the iPhone emulator and the Windows Phone are by far the two best. They kind of go back and forth on which one has the most features, but this iPhone emulator is very capable, runs very quickly, starts very fast, and very easy to use. So I'm back at a home screen. I can flip around. You can see Hello World is a new app tile, and when we click that, we launch in, and we've just got a gray screen because we haven't added any UI at this point. But our app is running. It's running on a simulator that is, simulating the iPhone layout, and you've got some options up here in the menu bar for the simulator. There's some nice options here that are familiar to you if you've done some Windows Phone development. You have some keyboard keystrokes here, command left, command right, to rotate the device left and right. And so I can rotate my simulator, and now we can actually fit most of it on screen. You can see the home button now. The rotation there pops out when you jump out of your app, but you can always rotate back, right, and stay in here. So some pretty nice features, the ability to rotate, the ability to shake it, to go to the home screen or even go to the lock screen, and you can see this is the iPhone lock, and at the bottom it says slide to unlock, and we're back to where we're going. So you can really simulate the device pretty well here using the iPhone simulator. Okay, so let's move this out of the way for a minute and go back to our application. I'm going to go ahead and stop running. And when I stop running, my emulator is still up. I'll try to get back here. This thing is still running, and Hello World is still installed. So that's nice. It doesn't have to relaunch it each time when we come back in and make some changes. So let's add just a little bit of UI to our app, and then we'll have a good understanding of how our first iPhone app works. So in order to do that, like I said earlier, you need to design these things in Xcode. And there's this XIB file that is created for you by Xamarin Studio. In the old days, iPhone development and Mac development in general and Xcode in general, there was two products. It was Xcode and Interface Builder. And Interface Builder was a fully separate product, and it was focused on just building the UI. Recently, a few years back, Apple decided to combine the two products, and now Interface Builder lives inside Xcode. So they used to be NIB files, N-I-B, and now that it's inside Xcode, they're XIB files, Xcode Interface Builder files, or zib files. So now it's all in one product. You just go ahead and double click on the zib file, and what that does is it opens Xcode, and you can see it's coming on screen here. And you can think of this, and let me size this so we can see everything in our window. You can think of this paradigm kind of like the Visual Studio Blend design paradigm. If you've done any work in WPF or Silverlight or even some Windows Phone work and XAML work, the design tool in that regard was a separate application called Blend. You could do some design in Visual Studio, but they really pushed you towards a separate application. And in Xamarin Studio, when we're doing iPhone development, it's the same idea. We use Xcode as the way to design our UI, and we use Xamarin and C# to write all of our code. So you get dropped into a designer. This can be very unfamiliar to people if they're from the Visual Studio world. There's quite a bit different here, so we'll just touch on some of the key pieces. There's a lot to learn with Interface Builder. It would take a series of videos on their own to show you through all these pieces. So we'll just get down to the things that we need to know about. So on our main design surface here, we see a frame that looks like an iPhone. You can see up here, it tells us that it's an iPhone Retina 3.5-inch design screen that we're working within. We're inside the Hello World view controller zib, and we're looking at the view here. And if we look over on the right-hand side, kind of in the bottom here, there's a couple of icons, and this third icon here that's a box shows us a list of components from what they call the object library. And at the very bottom here is a search box, and you can filter this down by just typing in there. So if we wanted to add a button, you can see there's a button here, and then we can drag and drop, just kind of like we're used to in maybe Windows Forms development. So I can add a button here, and you'll see there are some snap lines here. There's some interface guidelines that Apple has on spacing and padding, so we can add a button, and it'll snap to these lines, so you get kind of a nice UI, very similar to the old Windows Forms designer in that regard. So let's add a button, and then we want to say add something to do with text, maybe a text field, and that would be editable text, so we can decide where we want to put that. Maybe we want, and you can see how many different design lines we're getting here. We're getting a top, bottom snap line and a center line on the button text. And if I click on here and drag one of these handles out, then you can see I can get a right edge thing. So you can get a nice design layout here pretty quickly using just the drag and drop. If you don't want to search, you can certainly scroll through this list, and you can see some of these. If you have an iPhone, these components should be familiar to you. Here's a switch component that you're able to turn on and off. And notice that I can't size that one. That's a fixed size from Apple. And then here's what would be like a slider component to drag left and right. And I can change the size of this guy by dragging the handle. So I can drag this handle over and make sure I get a right snap, and you can see this center line snap with the text box. Let's actually move this below. You can see it's a pretty straightforward experience in this regard, where it's just drag and drop, put things on your form, and things will work. Now, I've made some edits to my Xib, and I want to make sure that those edits make it back to my Xamarin Studio application. So what I need to make sure to do is save. In Mac world, that's Command S, or just come up to the File menu and say Save. And as soon as I do that now, and I flip back to Xamarin Studio, what will happen here, if I look over in this Designer CS, I haven't added an outlet yet, so Designer CS won't be up to date. But if I flip back to Xamarin Studio and I just run my new code, I just press play, and it starts over in my emulator. Now you can see the UI that I put in place is now on screen, and I can click in here, and actually you can't quite see off the bottom of the screen, but when I click in that text box, I get the on-screen keyboard for Mac. And one of the nice features of this emulator is you can type using your physical keyboard without having to change any settings. In Windows Phone, you have to press page down to turn off the on-screen keyboard and start typing with your hardware keyboard. The iPhone emulator, it just works right out of the box. You just use your physical keyboard. So you can see I can click on my button, I can drag a slider, I can turn off this toggle, and I can type in this box. And then you can see I've got some of the cut, copy, paste, some of those features that come with the phone. I'm just double clicking on these words and dragging and highlighting. All of that stuff's emulated quite well in the iPhone emulator. And I just click define apparently, so we'll say done. Okay, so we've got some controls. I'm going to come back to Xamarin Studio. I'm going to close this, and I'm going to flip back to Xcode. We've got some controls on our form, and now we want to make this button actually do something. And let's put one more control. Let's just put a label that we can update when we click. So I'm going to search for label. I'll drag the label on, and I'll put it, let's put it here, and we'll drag it out to fill this whole space. So I'm going to click this button and have this label text update with, maybe how many times I clicked it or something to that effect. So in order to do that, after dropping the label, we need to somehow hook up what in Windows world we would think of as an event handler or a click handler, right? We need to click on the click of this button. We want to do something to this label. So we know these things have to have names, and we have to do something to wire up this click handler. So there's a couple of steps to doing this. The first one is come up here to the top bar, and you'll show the assistant editor. It looks like a little bow tie, guy wearing a tux. You click on the assistant editor, and now what opens up is a separate panel, and you can see that there's two files here. There's a .m and a .h. And if you look at the .m that's opened up, it says this file has been generated automatically by Xamarin Studio to mirror C# types. Changes in this file made by drag connecting from the UI designer will be synchronized back to C#, but more complex changes may not transfer. And then the .h, same thing, changes to this file may be matched back to C#. So this is Xamarin Studio managing this file, and what we're trying to do is we're trying to connect what's called in the iPhone world is called outlets to our page so that we can wire up a button click handler and deal with it in C# code. So the way to do this, you want to make sure that you're in the .h file, not in the .m file. So switch up here to your .h file, and then you want to left click on the item that you'd like to create an outlet for. In this case, we want to create an outlet for the button, and then you right click on the button and drag this little line over to the right, and you'll see it says insert outlet action or outlet collection, and you just drop, and it's going to say create a connection to the outlet, and now you have to give your button a name, and let's just call this my button. And when I say my button now, it'll stub in some properties, some code for us that sets a variable called my button equal to a UI button. And I want to do one more. I want to make sure I can get a handle to my label. So I'll left click on the label to select it. Then I'll right click on the label and drag and drop it in place. And I'll call this my label. And now I've got two outlets created on my .h file. Those are two properties that I have given names to so that I can reference those UI elements. Now again, the key here is to save. I'm going to press Command S. That just did a save. And then I'm going to flip back over to Xamarin Studio. And now if I look in my Designer CS, you can see that the actions that I did in Xcode were reflected in Xamarin Studio. And now I've got a Hello World view controller as a partial class. This is C# code. And now you can see I have get set properties for my button and my label. And this should look pretty familiar to someone in C#. Now you can reference this my button or my label by name, and they're of type UI button and of type UI label. So let's go into my controller here, and now I'm going to perform some additional steps after my view loaded. And I'm going to say something like my button, and you'll see that now it knows that it's my button and it's a UI button. And let's say that I want to hook the click event. So let's type click, and you'll notice that there isn't a click event like we'd be maybe used to in a Windows Forms application. That's because we're in a touch interface, and so the touch events are a little bit different. To do a click in iPhone, you want to hook to the event called touch up inside, which makes some sense if you think about it. If you tap your finger down, that's a touch down. And if you were to move your finger around the screen and then you lift your finger up, wherever you lifted your finger up, that element would fire the touch up inside, right? So if we are on the button, put our finger down and lift up on the button, we'll get a touch up inside the button bounds. So we'll say touch up inside plus equals, and now you can see I can just create it as an inline delegate here, or I could do something you might be more familiar with, which would be on my, let's say, on my button touch up inside. And now we just create that method here as a public void on my button touch up inside. And that takes in a sender and event args of E. There you go. And now we can do something in this click. So what I want to do is I want to increment the count that's showing in my label text. So the first thing that I'll do is I'll store a private int called counter. And then in the touch up inside, I want to set my label dot text, let's scroll down here a little bit so you can see this. Let's say my label dot text. I want to set that equal to whatever the counter is. I spell counter correctly up here. And each time you touch it, before I set the text, let's just set the counter plus plus. So increment the counter each time you touch up inside, and then update the label to reflect whatever the counter is. And let's say that it actually is string.format, and notice that I'm using C# idioms here. and we'll say clicks after it. Oops. Sorry about that, switch spaces. So we'll say however many times we've tapped, it'll say 1 clicks, 2 clicks, 3 clicks, 4 clicks, that sort of thing. So I'm gonna go ahead and save, and I'm gonna run, and I'll bring my emulator back over here. And Xamarin Studio is running and now launching. And now we have a button, and now we can see 1 click, 2 click, 3 click. So there you go. Now you've got a button wired up, and it's hooked up to a label, and you've got a working iOS app. Maybe not the most useful, but you've got a button that updates a label. So let's go back here. I'm going to stop running. I'll move my emulator out of the way and just review quickly what we did, and you'll be all set to go. So again, reviewing the anatomy of this project, there's an app delegate class, and there's a main CS. If we look at main CS, that's the main entry point for our application. It tells the application which class will be used as the app delegate. Then we go and look at app delegate. It says, for this application, I'm going to be responsible for creating this window and telling you which view controller to use as the root view controller for the window. I want to then make that window visible and go ahead and run. So then we look at this home view controller, and this is the controller part, and the zib would be the view part. So the controller is the root controller. This is where we'd write our C# code. When the view loads, this is where we would hook into UI elements like button clicks and setting label text. And to design the UI, you double click on this zib file and you get the designer, which is in Xcode. You can drag and drop controls from the Xcode object library over here on the right by clicking on this box and searching through this list, dragging and dropping. And then you can create outlets, ways to reference these UI components in Xamarin by going up to the assistant editor here, clicking on that, and then you right click and drag to drop your outlets into the .h. So I've clicked on the assistant editor, I left clicked on my button. You make sure that this guy here is set to your .h, and then let's say we wanted to do something in this text box. We right click on the text box, drag it, and drop it to create an outlet. It's asking us for a name, so we call this my text box. We say connect, and now we've got a property with a name of my text box and a type of UI text field. Now let's show one more critical step. If we were to go back now to Xamarin and go into the designer CS, notice that that text box is not here yet. I haven't saved my changes in Xcode, so Xamarin hasn't detected that I made any changes yet. You got to make sure to save in Xcode. So I'll come over here and I'm going to press Command S to save, and now flip back to Xamarin, and there it was. And now you can see it shows up. Xamarin Studio detected the change and updated my view controller to have a reference to my text box now. And now when I'm over here in code, if I go into a method, I can start typing and I can get access to that text box field. Once you've got all that, you just go ahead and run it. It starts the iOS simulator. It'll launch your application and it'll all be wired up. So that's a quick overview on how to use Xamarin Studio and Xcode to build your first iOS application that's written with C# code behind and XIB or Zib front-end language.